Here is your African true story. Africa-wide, the plight of African domestic workers in the Middle East. The International Labour Organization estimates that there are around 3.6 million domestic workers employed across the Arab states. This is largely due to the deficit in social care for the young, sick, and elderly across the region, leading to changes in household structures. This has also contributed to the increased recruitment of domestic workers from developing countries, including Africa, to work in households as nannies, cooks, and domestic helps. Families in the Gulf states are willing to pay relatively more than what many of these domestic employees could earn in their home countries for work every year. Domestic work represents the possibility of a better life for low-income women, especially as any additional income from these roles may help women support themselves and their families. However, these workers are subject to the Kafala system, whereby a domestic worker's legal status in the country is tied to their employer. This system places domestic workers at a risk of labor trafficking, physical, mental, and sexual abuse. Migrant domestic workers are often excluded from labor legislations in host countries, which leave them at the mercy of their employers until their contract is up. According to the International Labour Organization, the informal, unregulated, and isolated nature of work makes domestic workers vulnerable to abuse and often leaves them stranded in foreign countries with little help and no escape. Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman are some of the Gulf countries where some of the worst treatment of migrant workers to modern-day slavery has been observed. In 2008, Human Rights Watch found that around one domestic worker a week died in Lebanon of unnatural causes such as suicides or falls from tall buildings, namely during escapes. A decade later, a video emerged of the brutal assaults of two Kenyan women by two men and a woman on the streets of Beirut. The victims, Rosa and Shamila, were arrested and threatened with deportation, while the attackers went free, as it happens most often. In 2012, following years of reported abuse, the Kenyan government revoked work permits and introduced a ban on the flow of Kenyan workers to the Middle East. Prior to this legislation, recruitment agencies had no obligation to bring workers home following cases of abuse. Instead, they encouraged workers to remain in their workplaces or reshuffle them in other homes in order to sustain their ability to profit from their wages. A fresh and haunting incident is that of Diana Chepkemoi, a 24-year-old Kenyan student who had gone to Saudi Arabia in search of a better life but ended up getting detained. She revealed intricate details of her troubles in Saudi Arabia during her emotional arrival that included long working hours, starvation, physical and mental abuse that she received from her employers. In 2017, African states with domestic workers in the Gulf signed a deal with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, negotiating a new trade deal where the domestic workers could go to these countries, ideally under protection of new regulations. The regulations included a minimum wage of $400 a month, plus housing and food, among many other rights ensured by the new bilateral agreements in the hope of ensuring the safety and protection of African domestic workers abroad. Abuse and exploitation of migrant domestic workers is an issue of international relevance that concerns the violation of human rights and must therefore be addressed accordingly. Domestic workers who are victims of abuse are entitled to the right of a fair trial or court appearances in order to expose horrors they have suffered. This may ensure that the household who perpetrate these abuses are prosecuted and punished so as to deter other households from committing similar crimes. Instead, these women are often threatened with deportation if they report their crimes. However, upon their return home, many face no job securities, nor savings, and suffer many psychological scars. The cases we see are just about a quarter of them all. There are so many stories that are untold of women and young girls who are stuck in the Middle East. They just sit there, waiting for their dawn, all hopes of ever getting home, whether dead or alive, having disappeared. And even with all these reports and data received, many young girls and women across Africa are still journeying to the Middle East. It is about time African governments who have domestic workers in Gulf countries do more to protect their people. This can happen by putting up stricter regulations to agencies that take these girls and women to work outside their home countries, and for the host countries to also be stricter on human rights violation committed by these employers. This can happen by harshly punishing those who abuse these women and girls in order to create an example and stop the brutal cycle. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching.